Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the third annual Global Climate Action Symposium. My name is Kim Cobb, professor in the School of Earth and Atmospheric Sciences and director of Georgia Tech's Global Change Program. Together with our partners, Georgia Tech Center for Serve, Learn, Sustain, the Atlanta Global Studies Center, as well as the Atlanta-based consulates of Germany, France, Netherlands, Switzerland, Belgium, and the UK, we are thrilled to welcome you to this fully virtual event showcasing some of the many programs, people, and organizations who are rising to the climate challenge. You'll hear from researchers, practitioners, youth activists, and movers and shakers from across the globe. This symposium comes as a critical moment in history. The new United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change released its sixth assessment report last month, outlining in fine detail how rising fossil fuel emissions are reshaping our climate system and contributing to the horrific spate of climate extremes we've witnessed this year and in previous years. At the same time, all eyes are on the upcoming Conference of the Parties to take place this fall in Scotland, where world leaders will hope to establish bold new goals to achieve net zero emissions by 2050, if not sooner. The stakes could not be higher. Current pledges are grossly insufficient to limit warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, the target outlined in the Paris Agreement. As we all hope for never before seen climate action on climate this decade, our global community of climate solvers becomes more important than ever. For no matter what happens in Scotland this fall, we all have a role to play in ushering our low carbon world into existence this decade. So let the Global Climate Action Symposium be an event that inspires you to ask, what's next for me, for my family, for my organization? Thanks for being here. The symposium will take place over 3 mornings, anchored on 3 themes. Today, we will feature sustainable food, tomorrow, climate and health, and Wednesday, the UN Ocean Decade. Within each theme, you can expect to hear perspectives and insights from a diverse array of experts with ample time for interaction with you, our valued audience members. MasterClasses and interactive workshops take place towards the end of each morning, with spotlight videos and student lightning talks immersed throughout the day. Stay until the very end of day 3 to learn the winners of our student art contest. Needless to say, the logistics of this symposium are daunting, and none of this would have been possible without the amazing work of the Global Change Program staff, most notably Selena Perrin and Daniela Estrada. Thank you so much. I also want to thank the Ray C. Anderson Foundation for its sustained and generous support of climate-related research and programming, such as the Ray C. Anderson Center for Sustainable Business, the Georgia Climate Project, Drawdown Georgia, and the Global Change Program. And now I'll turn it over to Selena Perrin, Communications Director for the Global Change Program. Take it away, Selena.
Hi, everyone. My name is Selena Perrin-Langer, and I'm the current Director of Communications at the Georgia Tech Global Change Program. I'm thrilled that you can be here with us today at our 3rd annual symposium. Before moving into our keynote discussion, I'd like to pass the virtual microphone to Aart van der Vorst. Aart van der Vorst is the Consul General for the Kingdom of the Netherlands and the Senior Netherlands Government Representative in the Southeastern United States, and currently represents the EU Presidency in the US Southeast.
My name is Aart van der Vorst, and I'm the Netherlands Consul General here in the Southeast, based out of Atlanta. Currently, I'm also representing Slovenia, that is the rotating president of the European Union. First and foremost, I would like to thank Georgia Tech, the participants, and also the 5 other European consulates to make it possible and create this new Global Climate Action Symposium. A platform that we expect this year again that new leadership has the opportunity to flourish. We all have read the worrisome conclusions of the UN IPCC report. The warning signals come at a very important time. We are less than 2 months out of the negotiations in Glasgow, where world leaders must agree that emissions really have to come down. We have it in our own hands, and the necessary transitions are huge, but the IPCC report shows once again that doing nothing is not an option. So that's why we have agreed in the European Union to reduce emissions by at least 55% by 2030. That is our commitment to the COP26 Climate Summit in Glasgow this autumn. So leading by example, the European Union Commission works on extending the emissions trading systems. It also coordinates to support those most affected by these green transitions. It's developing a biodiversity strategy for 2030 and mainstreaming biodiversity priorities across all policy areas, from trade and industry to agriculture and maritime. A zero pollution ambition, focusing on circular and sustainable economy is important, and ensuring that our tax policies can contribute to achieving the EU climate ambitions is not stuck away, but is high on the list what we have to do. But that being said, what I think is important also is to keep an eye on what we are doing here today in Atlanta. Having the conference on global climate action in the heart of the southeastern region is an opportunity. We are in a region there are still elements that do not understand the reasoning about climate change, are supporting the previous US administration in rolling back mitigation measures, etc. The conference and the symposium now here in Atlanta gives you a responsibility, but also an opportunity. Additionally of thinking what we can do globally, I would like to invite the participants of this conference in Georgia to focus on what we also can do in the region, and especially in convincing these policymakers to feel comfortable to move forward. It really matters, because we can only move forward when we all move forward. Wishing you all a very productive and successful symposium, and hope to see you all in person next year. Thank you.
Thank you for that welcome. As our opening speakers articulated, this symposium is meant to facilitate global climate action, and I'm so happy to welcome our very global audience. Feel free to say hi in the chat and let us know where you're joining in from. Today's events center on sustainable food systems, from large-scale systems to small urban farms. We'll begin today with a keynote discussion with Alice Rolls and Max Gruenig, then investigate sustainable urban farming during a panel discussion. After a round of brief lightning talks, we'll conclude today's events with our first class in our MasterClass series, Changing the Food System One Smoothie at a Time. You can find a link to the full event agenda in the chat. During coffee breaks, we'll show selected student art pieces from our Climate and Art contest. Winners will be announced on September 29th. Now, without further delay, I'm excited to introduce our keynote speakers for the day, Alice Rolls and Max Gruenig. Make sure to use the Q&A and chat feature to ask your questions. We'll reserve 15 minutes at the end of the keynote to ask audience questions. Max Gruenig is a climate and energy economist with expertise and experience in the US and Europe. He is a co-founder of Pocasito in Charlottesville, Virginia, and a senior policy advisor with think tank E3G. Previously, Max served as the president of the US Ecologic Institute and worked for Ecologic Institute Berlin. His work focuses on climate action, sustainable cities, and the energy transition. In conversation with Max, we welcome Alice Rolls. Alice Rolls has devoted her entire professional career to the environment, working for 34 years in the nonprofit arena, lending her expertise to the development of 3 organizations. Alice is currently the president and CEO of Georgia Organics, a nonprofit connecting organic food from Georgia farms to Georgia families. Welcome, Max and Alice.
Thank you, Selena, and good morning, everybody. I hope you can hear and see me okay. And I am actually, since I was asked, or since Selena asked, where are you dialing in from? So I'm talking to you from Charlottesville, Virginia, and which is also an interesting place in terms of, it's in between rural and urban, very surrounded by very rural and agriculturally productive areas, and a little bit closer, at least, to Atlanta than my other workplace, which is Washington, D.C. So as has been said already, so we're just over a month away from the next UN climate negotiations in Glasgow, but we are just a few days past a UN food summit, which happened on September 23rd, and which, if you read about it, was extremely controversial, both in terms of people trying to influence who's on the stage, who can be seen and heard, meaning a lot of power there from the traditional agricultural sector, but also people boycotting it and saying, we're not being heard and seen. So this tells you already there is a lot of, well, at least change happening and discussion happening in the food sector as well. And today, here this morning, we want to talk about the link between climate change and food. And I'm just going to take a quick step back. We talk a lot about climate change, about greenhouse gases, and then we talk a lot about CO2, but we also talk about methane. And especially methane links very closely to agriculture. So if we look at the number 2 greenhouse gas, methane, about 40% of it comes from agriculture. And of course, some of the CO2 too. So agriculture is relevant. So we need agriculture to be part of this solution, especially when we have ambitious targets such as net zero by 2050. Then, of course, it begs the question, what does agriculture do? What can actually organic farming do? And for that, we have here with us this morning Alice Rolls. Thank you so much for dialing in. And I want to start right away with this very, very difficult question. Of course, not pinning the whole responsibility of saving the planet onto you, but of course, I'm curious as a climate guy, and everybody eats food. So we're all linked to the food system. We're all recipients or producers or both in the food system. So Alice, what role can organic farming play in this global challenge? And specifically, also your role at Georgia Organics. Thank you for being with us this morning.
Thanks, Max. Good morning, everybody, coming from all over the world, I guess. And it's great to start and kick off today's discussion around food and agriculture. And your question is right at the heart of what Georgia Organics does here in Georgia and the U.S. And we've been working in this area for 25 plus years, and an effort to really advance organic farmers who have been growing in a manner that builds soil health. I think as our food system has become globalized, we have had to create efficiencies, and we've been reliant on synthetic fertilizers and pesticides and things like that. And we've trained ourselves into a cycle of feeding the plant and not the soil. And so at the heart of organic farming is feeding the soil. And it's, if we want to sequester carbon, then we have to think about soil health, soil tilt, and build that capacity to store carbon. And so organic farms are known to have a stronger carbon sequestration ability, as well as other benefits, including water retention, nutrient cycling, and root systems for the plant's ultimate health and ultimate healthy food that we want to be able to eat. So the practices that organic farmers have been utilizing for decades, things like cover crops, crop rotations, if you're a livestock farmer, rotational grazing, of course, not using synthetic pesticides and fertilizers, which are petroleum-based products. And some farms have really advanced on no-till, because as soon as you till the soil, even on an organic farm, you release carbon into the atmosphere. So how do we pull down carbon and keep it in the soil? So organic farmers have really been doing this for decades, and you might argue centuries. And so we need to continue to find ways to lift those organic farmers and this type of farming across all broad spectrums across the world.
Thank you, Alice. And of course, I mean, this sounds very compelling. But now, if I can ask this question, we soon will have 9 to 10 billion people on the planet, and the advocates for conventional agriculture They will tell you, well, organic farming is nice and good, but we can never feed the whole planet without synthetic fertilizers, without pesticides, and without genetically modified crops, which is also very touchy topic in agriculture. And they will just say, well, we wish we could do, but it's just not possible. What's your response to these?
Well, my response is to remind everybody that most food grown in the world is grown by smallholders of 5 acres or less. So big ag produces about 27% of our food, you know, a lot of commodities, obviously. So I think we have a kind of mega farm perception out there because of the voices and where the capital lies, where the power lies, where the policy lies. Is in that sector. So we need to remind ourselves, we need to lift again those small landholders, those farm holders across the globe, and lift their voices because they're not being heard and they're not necessarily being helped by policy. So that is daunting, but it's also encouraging, and I think is a huge opportunity because we have the ability to grow food right where we are. And I'd like to I want to give you an example because I think in the pandemic, we saw some very interesting developments. I think that COVID really was here, at least in the US, was a real black eye for agriculture. You saw supply chains of various supply chains breaking down, but you really saw it breaking down in the food system. Food was not able to get from point A to point B. And then we had a crisis of food access. And you saw these images of people lining up at food banks, miles and miles. And then you saw food rotting in the field. So with the pandemic, we saw a vulnerability of these amazing systems that have been set up, transportation, distribution within our big agricultural system. But where we saw incredible growth was, the farmers markets. We saw 400% increases in sales at farmers markets. So people were turning to their local communities where possible. Not everybody can grow food, and depending on your climate, but certainly here in the South, people turn to their local farmers. And we saw a certain resilience that we've all been talking about for decades, but we got to see it in action. And an example, this is a cool example of a company here in Atlanta that has been delivering fresh. They aggregate from local and organic farmers, and it's called Fresh Harvest, and they aggregate and deliver to your door this wonderful boxes of fresh produce. And pre-pandemic, they had about 1,700 weekly customers that they dropped off. Their goal for the end of the year before the pandemic was to get to 1,900. That was like good growth for them. But after 2 months of the pandemic, they jumped to 4,100 customers. And then they had 3,000 people waiting on their waiting list to be part of Fresh Harvest. They grew from 30 employees to 67 employees. They had to double their freezer, refrigerator space. They expanded rapidly as a small business. So I mentioned that because there was a wonderful resilience, but it also shows the cracks in the bigger systems. And we put a lot of energy, we put a lot of resources and development and research to the global food system, and we need to continue to do that. But we also need to invest in these smaller scale community-wide solutions. Just like we think about local electricity grids, we also need to think about local food grids.
Well, thank you, Alice. And it's a very interesting point that you make about resilience in the food system, and where actually small and local provides more rather than the big and supposedly efficient and highly technology-heavy oriented farming. Still, you mentioned urban food operations. How about urban farming? It's been a real trend, and of course, not all urban farming is organic, of course. There's also not necessarily the same, but what do you think of smaller and urban farms or urban gardening, and what role does this play, in your view, in the overall food system on our road towards a more resilient, a more climate-friendly, and a healthier food system?
Yeah, and here in Atlanta, we have a very rich history, particularly within community gardens here in Atlanta. A lot of African American gardeners and farmers that are growing, and it's exciting to see that kind of development and playing on generational strengths of agricultural knowledge. And so it's exciting to see and be a witness to actually what's transformed in Atlanta. You know, you can't drive, very far without seeing some sort of food garden or urban farm. So I think this is a wonderful trend because 68% of the global population is going to be living in urban areas by 2050. So we need to grow food where we live. And I think that it's part of the solution. It's not the only solution. Obviously, small acre, you can't quite have the yields that you might have on bigger farms. But if you have a lot of small farms, you can certainly grow a lot of food. Here in the Atlanta area, we actually, a gentleman did a study years ago to try and figure out, well, how much of our fruits or vegetables could we produce in for Georgians or for for the city dwellers here, and the math that he did came back at 40%. That is not very vetted research, but we have a lot of land here in the Atlanta area that we can grow food on, and we can get creative in the ways we develop our cities to include green space, to include urban farm spaces. And there's nothing like local food by going out, if you live in a community and going out to an urban farm that's down the street, or a community garden that's built within the development of your neighborhood. That's the ultimate local food. Likewise, I think we really also need to see a lot more people just growing their own food. That's I like to remind people that if you know what you're doing and you have one raised bed, you can grow $500 worth of food. So we all need to get a little bit more knowledgeable about growing our own food if we ultimately want to have a lot of resilience.
Right, and of course there's also the whole educational or learning experience of being closer to the food product. We always hear how much is thrown away and how little care people or regard have for food items because they come from the supermarket to the fridge, and then half of it goes to the landfill. And there's really the thing, if you bend your back for it in your own front yard or on your balcony, you're not going to toss it very easily, just out of respect for your own self. Still, Alice, do we need to reimagine our whole food system? I mean, the majority of food purchase, people go to a supermarket, to a grocery store, they buy the same food more or less year round. It's always there. Prices go up and down a little bit, but if there's too much variation, people actually complain about it. They will not accept that actually the strawberry is not available a certain time of the year, etc. And is this compatible with a sustainable food future, or do we have to actually take a step back and say, wait, this is not normal, this is not how it can be?
Yeah, that is a very good question, and I think this is probably a controversial thing to talk about because we don't want food to be inaccessible from a cost standpoint. So I want to say that up front. But if we're going to reimagine our food system, we have to really note the true cost of food. The externalities that are being passed on right now with our global food system to water health, soil health, our own physical health, our community health, is not being factored in. And so you get a little bit of, that's one reason that organic food is more expensive, is because that cost is buried in the cost you see at the grocery store. So how do we level the playing field? So much of our subsidies, our policy and our subsidies are going towards our, soy, wheat, corn, and only 2% of our farmland is actually growing fruits and vegetables, but yet we're told to eat, 50% of our plate should be fruits and vegetables. So we need to look at the externalities, and we need to think about, what are we growing? Are we growing food that we should be eating? Are we just subsidizing food for livestock, which is a lot of what's going on? If we re-engineered that overnight, it would transform agriculture. So it's one of the hugest opportunities that we have quickly to change the way we are growing food in this country, in this world. And that's why I think with policy, we've got to create, the subsidies have to be aligned with production practices. So if we change our subsidies, okay, you can get a subsidy, but you got to start implementing these type of climate-friendly practices on your farm. And we're going to help you. We're not going to leave you stranded out there, because we're going to get our ag education institutions involved. We're going to get extension involved. We're going to get all these agencies to help you in that migration. That is an exciting opportunity for us if we can find the will to do that.
That's very compelling. Alice, do you think all farming in the end, like not tomorrow, but after a certain time, all farming should be organic at some point?
I would argue yes, but I think we have to be patient, and we have to be supportive of farmers in transitioning towards that. I mean, if you're a farmer and you've been growing a particular commodity, and let's say you've invested $500,000 in a combine for your cotton crop or whatever it is, you can't just go in and, we need you to start organic farming now. So what are the steps along the way that will help that farmer transition, and how are we going to help those farmers? We can't leave farming is already hard. The profit margins are already thin. So we can't leave farmers just out there blowing in the wind. We've got to create some stepping stones to help them get there. But those farmers and bigger farmers were starting to get better models when they adopt these kinds of practices, and it might be more expensive the first few years, but then they're starting to see more resilient crops, better yields, better long-term outlooks for their farms. So that to me says, okay, we can do this. We might have some challenges, like here in the South, we have a lot of pest pressure. We have a lot of weed pressure here in this humid climate. And farmers are used to using pesticides and herbicides to deal with those problems. That's why it's got to be comprehensive. We need the research and everything that's going to be the wraparound to support that bold, audacious move.
Yeah, very, very, very good point that there's a transition, and that people also need help for the transition, especially since, I mean, maybe not everybody who's not deeply involved in the farming sector knows, but farming is not a highly lucrative business for a lot of people. They have very thin margins. So very good point that you mentioned the support on the transition. You mentioned soil at the very start of the conversation, and how organic farming can help repair or rebuild soil. What kind of time frame do we have to think here? Like if I have a conventional farm and I really ran the farm in a very traditional sense with synthetic fertilizers and pesticides, and basically have exhausted the soil to the maximum, and I get a aha moment, and I think I want to change this. But of course, it's not happening overnight. What time frame do we have to imagine here?
Well, it doesn't, I mean, we're talking about seasons here to adopt different practices. But let's say you're leasing several thousand acres of farmland and you don't have the benefit of, I'm going to just let this land sit here. I'm going to put a cover crop in because I don't need it. So that's where it gets complex, is how do we help farmers troubleshoot those kinds of issues so that they can still be growing while we're building that. But absolutely seasonally, we can start doing some of these practices on any farm if it's not happening right now. So I do think that the models out there are very important, because I can go talk to a farmer, a conventional farmer, and I can talk his or her ear off, but until they see a farm down the street that's growing in this manner and they're having some success from their business model standpoint, it's going to be difficult to convince. So that's why we absolutely have to lift really good models within rural communities so that we can encourage that kind of action. And I can give you an example. We've been trying to work on, Georgia is the #1 peanut producer, but we haven't had any organic acreage at all. And so we helped create a cooperative of organic farmers. And that cooperative has gone, it started in 2018 with 3 farmers. 2019, it went to 6 farmers. 2020, it went to 12 farmers, doubling the output in terms of harvest. And it's that kind of gradual buildup that we need, and the models and the cooperative structure and the infrastructure that's needed then to also process or harvest those crops. And with peanuts, there's a lot of processing. So it's the practices can start soon, but the infrastructure and the policies and all those things that support it, definitely take longer.
Right, and it's a very important point, of course, because it's all about different stages in the process. So there's not like an end point in farming. There's always change. There's always new things happening. There might be severe weather events impacting you, or there might be an environmental impact coming from maybe a neighboring farm or a neighboring road, etc. So what I wonder, and correct me if this even already exists and I as a consumer just don't know about it, but would we need different degrees of USDA organic certification just to make this easier to say, okay, we're in transition, or this is maybe organic plus, like somebody who's doing this for many years and where it's really, really established, and where maybe it's a regenerative practice in itself? I mean, I'm just, I'm not an expert, so let's hear from you.
Well, I love what you're saying. We have to remind ourselves that the National Organic Program, the NOP, as it's called, in the USDA, is a volunteer marketing program. Farmers pay money to validate that they're growing in this way instead of the other way around. We don't have any transparency on how food is grown. But we're asking the organic farmers who are already going through all these jumps and extra steps and costs and whatnot to do that. So why don't we turn the National Organic Program into not just a marketing program? It's good that they've developed a good brand, but it becomes the baseline. Okay, you want to qualify for these climate-friendly subsidies that we're going to create. Okay, well, this is what you're going to do, and we're going to help you do that. And then you go up the ladder. Then we create some levels. So it's organic plus, like you say, it's regenerative. You're actually not just holding steady, you're actually drawing down carbon, and you're contributing to climate solutions in that regard. And instead of creating brand new labels and confusing the public, why don't we just build on what we already have? So if I could be like the Secretary of Ag for Clean for a Day, that would be the immediate thing that I would do. Is just start there, because there's a good foundation there. It's not perfect. The organic program is not perfect, but it's a great foundation. And I think it's a wonderful springboard that could accelerate a lot of this policy work that we need to do.
if we talk about what is organic and what isn't, there's also now, especially in the field of urban farming, a lot of interest in kind of mixing technology and urban farming, and especially under the concept of hydroponic farming. And maybe you can also explain for the viewers who don't know what hydroponic farming is. And I wonder, is this something that can qualify as organic farming, or is this too removed from the core principles of organic agriculture?
No, I don't think so. I mean, this has been already a very controversial initiative within the National Organic Program about being able to certify, hydroponic farms. I'm less concerned about that in terms of more concerned about the actual technologies. I don't like technologies that turn their back on the sun. So if hydroponics can figure out ways to not use more energy to grow food, but maximize the sun, and whether that's solar or other techniques, that's fine. But right now, a lot of the hydroponic farms use a ton of energy, and so we have to solve that problem. One of the good things about hydroponic farming is you have a controlled environment. And with weather events and the riskiness, because we have to remember the farmers not only are part of the solution, but they're going to be feeling the effects in an intimate way, the impacts of climate change. They already are. And so, which might accelerate their, adoption of new practices, but it also might, bankrupt farms. So I think we need a lot of tools in our tool belts, and hydroponic can be, and other innovations in vertical farming within hydroponic in terms of land use space are all important considerations. And we need to be continuing to strive to do that in a manner that's going to be climate friendly.
Yeah, great. Great to hear that it's an open system and that you don't say we're not open for new ideas, but also saying, well, we should use what's there, so the sun, and not go in an enclosed environment and basically turn it into manufacturing sorts of.
Yeah, not to mention taste. I mean, I do find food grown in the field. This is just me personally. Tastes better. You got a lot more opportunity for a variety of nutrient uptake in plants within a rich soil environment versus just nutrients being added to a water cycling system. And some people are getting creative with that, and they use aquaponics as part of that. And so it'll be interesting to see how this develops, even more so, particularly in the U.S.
Alice, since we talk a lot about farmers and their challenges and also opportunities, how is the situation, especially in Georgia, of course? Do you have a problem getting young people, and young can be flexible, so I'm just saying like people in the active workforce engaged in farming? Or is it something where you see farms disappear or maybe not continue after a generation? How is the state in Georgia in this, of course, looking at the Georgia organics, at organic farming in particular, but maybe the state in general, how is this workforce situation?
Well, it's a problem overall in agriculture. The average age is 68 in the U.S. for the age of farmers. We in Georgia have seen an increase in the number of small farmers, so that's encouraging. And I think young people are drawn more to the good food movement, if you will. But we also have to align our university systems. A lot of time individuals go through, UGA College of Ag, and they come out with some sort of ag business development, but they're not necessarily coming out farming. So we need to use technical schools. We need to use our university systems to really encourage curriculum that's going to teach people how to organic farm, regenerative farming practices, whether it's large scale or small scale. We need to create lots of apprenticeships and internships, because sometimes if somebody goes and they intern or apprentice on a farm and they decide that farming isn't for them, that's a success. Farming is not for everybody. It's it's a small business. You have to have lots of different talents and different buckets, but then you're also out, physically toiling outside all day, all year long, certainly here in the South. So it's not for everyone. So we need to figure out ways to create pipelines, create opportunities for people to have experience. That's why community food systems and community ag and urban agriculture is good, because a lot of young people that are coming to this discipline are not necessarily coming from multi-generational farm families. We need that to happen, but we're attracting people from different disciplines, and that's exciting. So we don't, this old concept of you grew up in a farm family and, those are the only people farming is important and critical, and we need to focus on that. But the reality on the ground is we're getting people from all sorts of places and businesses, or people that are tired of the corporate world and start farming because they want to be outside. They want to, they want to do those things. Now we have to help them prosper, run good farm businesses, and that's why farmer prosperity is at the core of everything Georgia Organics does. Because if a farmer can't survive, then they're not going to be able to provide all these benefits for society, feeding us, solving climate change, and so, yeah, so I'm excited about that, but we still have a lot of work to do.
Right. Obviously, we're not 100% there yet, but it's good to see that there's progress and that you're active in this field and that you're, recognizing also the challenges. It's also very important to just be aware of where the pain points are to then find solutions. And
yeah. And there's one other thing I'd like to add there, which is how do we get farm workers on a pathway for farm ownership, and providing some access to capital, access to land for those individuals who already spend their time farming and understand farming and are knowledgeable about farming. How do we create opportunities? And that's a very diverse audience. It's a lot of Hispanics and in that arena. So what pathways are being created for those people, those individuals with expertise to move into those positions of opportunity?
Yeah, that's also, of course, another very, very important question is racial diversity and equity. I mean, in society in general, but of course also in farming. And I imagine that's also an area where we can still grow a lot. How is the situation in Georgia from your point of view?
Well, we have a lot of Black farmers in our movement, and Georgia Organics specifically, we're trying to direct half of our resources to BIPOC farmers in everything that we do. We need to lift historic groups and nonprofits like Federation of Southern Cooperatives and SAFON in the Southeast, who have been working for a long time regionally with farmers. There's a lot of conversation and hopeful policy more in creating better access to capital and debt relief for Black farmers in the South. So there's a lot of need, and we need to be attentive to that and lifting those farmers and those organizations that are supporting, and Georgia Organics is trying to do our part in that regard.
Great. That's also great to hear. And I think we do have a lot of questions from the audience both in the event chat and in the Q&A, which means I will try to go back and forth between the two. And my apologies up front if I I miss one. I mean, we certainly won't have time for all the questions, but I also want to encourage you to still add additional questions. And if you're lucky, we can address them here now. But otherwise, maybe you can engage afterwards still with Alice. And also, of course, there'll be more conversations today. The whole day is about sustainable food. So even if we can't solve all the questions now, maybe later. So one question that I found very interesting, and I think it came from Jeff Greenspan, who was very productive in the chat, I have to say. One question about cooperation between urban farms and rural farms, whether there's kind of partnerships and either knowledge exchange or in terms of, you could also imagine physical hardware, I mean, like tools and machinery. Does this exist, or is this a model that you contemplate?
Yeah, I totally believe that we need to work harder on cooperative models, and we have some successful models. There's a group of farmers in Middle Georgia, Growers Cooperative. There's Collective Harvest in the Athens area, where they are pooling their resources to particularly aggregate and distribute food. I think this is really important for rural farmers. We need more infrastructure in places where farmers can bring food and distribution opportunities to get food into bigger cities, to where people are. At the same time, we also need to work on systems right where farmers are. And we've been working on farm to school, and we've got a newer initiative in farm to early care. How can we get some of this healthy food that's grown in these communities right to families in those communities, often, under-resourced individuals who don't generally have access to fresh, really good access to this kind of high quality food. So we need to get innovative and figure out, how do we connect our school systems? How do we help support those kinds of connections so farmers, in rural areas aren't having to be reliant on an Atlanta marketplace or a big city marketplace. So I do think there's opportunities for some cross-fertilization between urban farmers and rural farmers, and most of that's happening, either within urban or within rural areas, but not a lot of cross-fertilization. But there's nothing to say that can't happen.
Right. So that's also great. Building new ideas here in this context, and maybe we also inspire some people in the session who are part of the audience to take steps. Obviously, there's a lot of interest in urban farming, and so we also have a little bit of a bias, or we're a little heavy in that field in the questions. But of course, some of the questions also can apply to rural farming or rural ag practices. One question was about soil contamination and what to do about it. And of course, specifically, the question was in urban farming context, how can you make sure that actually the food you produce there is healthy? And since we know there's been years of various pollutants coming in on urban areas, how can we address this? And is there guidance for it, or a toolkit for urban farmers?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of resources out there, and getting soil tests, getting soil tested for contaminants, that's also a cost. I mean, soil tests just in general for nutrients and deficiencies is an easier thing, but soil tests for contaminants more expensive. So we need some measure to support urban farmers in testing that soil, because you don't want to be growing food where lead is and things like that. Now, certainly over time, you can mitigate some of those impacts with good soil building practices and remediation efforts through creative efforts like using fungi and things like that. But that's going to be out of the league for many people. So, I mean, one way that people get around that on land that is contaminated is doing raised beds with, some hard cover between the soil layers, and that creates some flexibility and some healthier options for peace of mind. And we certainly have seen that in urban areas. But the most important thing is get that soil tested, and then have that moment of decision in terms of, is this the right place to grow or not, and can you do it in a healthy manner? So this is all. We're very fortunate in the city of Atlanta because of all the community activity and efforts. The city of Atlanta actually has urban ag staff. That was something that we at the community level worked on. So this is an issue that our local institutions and municipalities can play a supportive role in perhaps, underwriting some of those costs for people that want to grow in urban areas. So looking at the history, not all the land here obviously has been in industrial use. A lot is residential here in the area. So, but looking for things like lead, asbestos, those kinds of things are must.
Right. Yeah, very good point. And also great that you mentioned the role of the city, of course, in Atlanta, but we also look beyond Atlanta. So local governments are very important in enabling and supporting this, not just with money, of course, but also just with their expertise and with facilitating, maybe making lots available. One question came also up in the Q&A regarding are there regulatory barriers such as, land use restrictions that maybe an urban farm could face? Do you see this in practice, or are we pretty much good to go anywhere if we see land that we can access?
Yeah, no, and that's something that a group of organizations worked on in the city of Atlanta, was really codifying the ability to farm in the city of Atlanta. So we created policies and got that passed by the city council to allow for those practices. It wasn't that there was anything that was preventing people, but we wanted just to make sure that it was officially in the code and allowed as a practice. And it was all that work that we did as a coalition and working with the city that then led the city to actually say, we're getting a lot of interest on urban agriculture, so we're gonna create an urban ag position. And so, one thing was leading to the other, which again, back to sort of the cooperative model we were talking about, the nonprofits and the advocates need to also be working cooperatively, because no one group could have done that on their own. It was because we had a coalition of institutions and nonprofits and universities that were on board with that, that pushed those kinds of policies. So we need to continue to advocate and champion and show up and get bills passed and policies passed that will allow for that. You run into a lot of problems with homeowner associations. That seems to be an area that's very restrictive. And then, of course, as soon as you start to introduce livestock, goats or chickens or things like that, things tend to get a bit tighter in terms of how many roosters you can have crowing in your city. But I think that given the level of interest that we've seen and the need and the advantages and opportunities, the people in power, are generally receptive to these kinds of practices.
Well, great to hear. And since you started already talking about new laws, bills, and legislation, and without getting highly political here, but we all know there might be a big bill coming at the federal level, the reconciliation package, also, of course, the bipartisan infrastructure bill. And a question coming here from Kim Cobb is whether there are any parts in these bills that, and we don't know yet, of course, what's really in the end, but is there hope, is there indication that there might be support for organic farming in them in the end?
Yeah, absolutely. Back in June, I attended a live stream session like this with Secretary Vilsack, the Secretary of Agriculture for the USDA, and he was discussing the whole Build Back Better initiative, the whole big infrastructure bill, and there was $4 billion slated for the agricultural center, agricultural area, and their work all centered in resiliency and transformation. And there were 4 key areas that he focused on: food production, processing, distribution and aggregation, and then consumers and markets. And I have to say that as I listened to that, and I've listened to similar presentations over the years, I've been involved in this movement for 16 years now, I kind of did a double take. I was like, everything out of that man's mouth were things that we've been espousing for years. It was support for small and medium farm, organic farming, regenerative farming, climate resilient farming, more specialty crops, which is the weird term for fruits and vegetables, under-resourced farms, and just equitable application of these practices across different types of people, different types of farmers. So it was really wonderfully encouraging. We are starting to see some of that now cycle in through grant opportunities and focus areas, and the different departments within USDA picking up the mantle in a bigger way. So I'm encouraged by what we're seeing. It's not something we've seen historically in past administrations. Even his administration back in the Obama presidency, when he was Secretary of Agriculture, then he was not saying all these things. And it was so surprising that I almost felt like, and again, this is just me, almost felt like, during COVID, they saw some things that might have been just a little scary in terms of food supply and homeland security, if you will. So I feel like there was some other motivations going on, as well, in terms of just how there was a lot of failure in our food system. So I'm encouraged by that, and hopeful that that's a trend that will continue to accelerate.
Great. Good to hear. Also, very exciting that after 16 years, you're still very energetic and positive. And
well,
it seems
one thing I'll say about that in movements is when I started, and I've shared this with people, but it gives me hope. When I started here at Georgia Organics, there were 9 farmers. This was back in 2004, so not long after even the National Organic Program wasn't created until 2002. 2004, there were 9 farmers markets in Georgia, and now there are over 150. And so in that 16-year span, which you could say is a long time or not a long time, I've gotten to witness and be part of an amazing emergence of a food movement that many of you who will be listening to sessions all day, you will see bits and pieces of that all day today in these conversations. Innovation at the local level is really inspiring. So while climate change is daunting, and you have moments of depression and anxiety, I think there is a lot of hope, and the fact that we do all eat every day means that we can all be part of the solution. It isn't some big energy sector thing that we often feel powerless about. So I've gotten to witness that, and it's inspiring, and it's just people from all different walks of life, whether they're a refugee, whether they're a new urban farmer, whether they've been doing community garden for decades, or they're a large farm that's been transitioning to new practices and has become certified organic. So there's a lot of need, don't get me wrong, but there's also what we've gotten to witness is I think in the ag sector is really one of the most hopeful places.
So you're seeing signs of hope, and that's very good. That's very positive. Also in the current political situation, are there any big items on your wish list for, like, not right now, but next year and the year after? What should be done or could be done that should be added to, be it federal or state or local decision makers' agendas?
Well, I've already mentioned one, which was the subsidies, transforming the subsidy system. That will change things literally overnight, I believe. We need a lot stronger leadership at the state level and within our Department of Agriculture and our university systems that are, you know, those voices are so important in talking to farmers out in particularly rural areas, larger farmers. And it's difficult to even have a conversation with them about how the climate change is real. So that is a reality. So leadership is very important. We're going to have a election coming up next year for Ag Commissioner likely. And so we need people to be involved in that conversation. And we did a sustainable ag debate when our current ag commissioner ran years ago. It was probably the first time any kind of debate was held like that with candidates. And we held it at Emory University here in Atlanta. And we had 600 RSVPs for that event, which shows you the level of interest that people have. But we can't look at agriculture as this thing that's way over here or just big farmers in Iowa. It affects all of us. And so we need to get engaged. And I think what the good food community has done has kept those community connections. Because we used to be an agrarian society, right? So everybody had a touch points and you understood that world. But now, you know, with ag getting specialized and, you know, fewer farms and bigger farms, you know, we've kind of taken ourselves out of the formula. So I think it's important that we all get reinvested back in that. And that's why we're seeing so much energy in the good food movement. So we need to have that kind of explode back into the big farm and be supportive of conventional farmers because they're just trying to make a living and many of them are growing food and doing the right thing. But we've gone down a pretty destructive path, and we need to help them in transitioning.
Yeah, I like that approach where you say it's not like, you know, good and evil and no boundary, no walls being built, but it's actually we're all in this together because in the end we have to all eat and we have to all make a living. And there's only one soil we can grow on.
Right.
We can't have another planet to start growing once this is gone. So taking this like a global perspective, I mean, since we are here at the Global Climate Action Symposium, and we heard there so many Europeans co-hosting this, and I'm European, of course. I wonder how much do you get inspiration and maybe knowledge exchange with people, be it in Europe or in other parts of the world, in Asia, or, you know, traditional techniques or new ideas for what can be done? Is that something that you draw energy and inspiration from as well?
Personally, I haven't gotten to participate in too much of those exchanges. I did get to go to Terra Madre, which is Slow Food's big conference where there were farmers from all over the world. And that was an amazing dynamic experience of that kind of sharing that's happening. We need better coordination, even, you know, within the organic groups across the country. And there is an Organic Trade Association, National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition, organizations that we belong to, and we help support policy work with them and kind of our boots on the ground here in Georgia for those organizations, and we lean heavily on their policy expertise. So a lot more could be happening, and obviously that suffered during COVID. Less of that kind of exchange happening, so hopefully we can come out of that. But I don't go to all these international conferences that probably you do. And I'm just too focused here on all the need right here.
Well, I mean, it certainly is also good. And I think the pandemic also definitely changed this for a lot of people. I mean, both making it in a way easier to participate, at least remotely, like we're doing it now, in events far away, but also, of course, a lot of things you have to see and touch and experience. And this has really come to a standstill. There's no question about it, which is also good, of course, because people fly less, right? So there's good and bad in all of that. But definitely quite a change. And I think farming and the food system is so interesting from my point of view, because you have the two coming together. This hyper local, because you really grow in one location, in one spot, and you said flavor. I mean, things taste differently depending on what soil they grow in and how they've been handled. And then you have also at the same time a global system where we can import green asparagus flown in year round, tastes pretty much the same year round. And this is happening in parallel. So it's both a very global system and a very local system. And that's also, of course, part of the challenge and the opportunity for making this, because every day we have choices, both as a consumer, but also working with the producer. As you said, you can switch, you can make steps in the switch. It's a transformation. If you're a conventional farmer, you don't have to go for 100% organic by tomorrow. You can do steps towards something. You can do things better and improve what you are already doing or building on the good things you are doing. And it's in everybody's interest in the end, because they will have a better soil. They will have also maybe better health impact for themselves. I mean, if we know people working in ag, the amount of toxins they're exposed to, that's also a very scary side of the story. I mean, very often we talk about this from a, global perspective and then a consumer perspective. But you mentioned a lot of farm workers, and they're exposed over decades to different toxins that can affect them or their children. And it's also a very important story to be told, I think, across agriculture. So, I mean, for this morning here, we heard a lot of new ideas, different ideas. We also heard from urban versus rural, or together in tandem, or how they can work together. We heard in the chat a lot of commentary, a lot of questions regarding very specific questions, which I kind of spared you here, like what kind of grants work for what. So not wanting to go too much in the specifics, but maybe you can read some of them and get back to them later. I also saw in the chat there was a lot of self-help in the chat, basically. So we do have a lot of experts here in the conversation, very interesting, who contributed their knowledge and their expertise about Georgia and the food and agriculture system in Georgia. So very exciting. And some people, I think, got new inspiration, new answers, being it about the use of compost, also very important topic. Also something that links us back into the circular aspect. And you mentioned this in the beginning, Alice, regenerative farming. But just for the people who are not experts, what's the concept of regenerative farming? And is it the same as organic farming? And how do the two concepts differ or work together?
Well, so you've got certified organic farming, and then, we at Georgia Organics kind of have a wider version of organic that we use. We're not saying, oh, you have to get certified organic, but regenerative is sort of the next level of organic, because you are looking at sequestering carbon in that farms are actually solving. They're not holding steady, as I mentioned earlier. They're actually drawing down carbon. And so we don't have really great measuring tools just yet how to do that, but we do know that these practices work. So that's, again, where I think that whole certification process that's focused on those production practices that we know work. But some of them aren't necessarily required, like no-till is a great practice, but it's not required in an organic setting. In regenerative, that might be something that we can move towards that will continue to build soil health. Or you have farms that are actually integrating livestock in their whole land management plan. And so you're building soil health in those kinds of ways, not necessarily required, but those are some of the types of regenerative farming practices. We're moving away from factory farming, but we might be integrating animals, smaller amounts of animals, particularly if we are successful in moving more towards a plant-based diet in this country, and reducing all those greenhouse gases that are emitted from all the crops that are grown for livestock and all the land use, that's going to graze particularly beef and cattle and bigger animals. So those are some of the practices that a farm would look towards. So an organic farmer might say, okay, I really want to try to get to no-till. It's harder when somebody's growing on 2 acres because they're doing intense production on those 2 acres. That's why no-till is more difficult. But some farmers do mulching methods, and they're successful on lasagna farming, if you will, and just layer with compost. And I'm glad compost was mentioned. I didn't mention it earlier, but we all need an individual level we need our municipalities, we need somebody asked Kim asked a question about our mayor's race here in Atlanta. We need to get composting happening, composting pickup. Communities are already doing this. This needs to be across. That is gold. That is just gold that's going to landfills. So that's part of that regenerative cycling. Let's get that stuff back on gardens. Let's get that black gold back into our lands and accessible for farmers to use throughout the state as well as in urban areas. So yeah, compost, important.
Yeah, and that's another important point. I mean, it's not just that we lose potential soil by getting organics into the landfill, but also, I mentioned this at the very beginning, how methane is so important as a greenhouse gas. And I said agriculture is responsible for 40%, which is of course a lot, but landfills are 20%. And that's not from the inorganic components, that's the organic rotting matter in the landfill that's then decomposing without doing any good, but just doing bad. So there we need to really take action, and we have a win-win and in multiple fronts if we divert the organic matter from the landfill. So here we go, big issue that we can actually solve relatively easily. We don't need new technology. We don't need a lot of money. We're not waiting for trillions there. This is really something that should and could be done. Wonderful. So here we have homework for everybody. I think we're at time, so pretty good landing here on spot. I want to thank everybody for their questions, but of course, above all, Alice, thank you so much for answering questions coming from all directions on all levels. Excellent point.
Thank you, Max. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, and thank you for the organizers who will now take back over the panel, and thank you, Selena.
Thank you so much, Alice and Max. That was an incredible discussion. We'll take a brief coffee break now and reconvene in 15 minutes for our panel discussion. And during the break, we'll showcase top student art submissions. Thank you all for being here with us today, and we'll see you back at 10:30 Eastern Daylight Time. Welcome back to the Global Climate Action Symposium. I'm thrilled to welcome you to our panel discussion, which will delve deeper into topics of sustainable food systems and urban farming. We'll reserve the last 15 minutes of the panel discussion for audience questions again, so make sure to keep using the chat and Q&A feature. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce today's moderator, Sofia Bork. Sofia Bork is employed with Truist as a readiness specialist in the Treasury Solutions Department. She is the founder of the Edgar Flores Memorial Latinx Ethno-Botanical Garden in the Sarah J. Gonzalez Park. She's also the recipient of the 50 Most Influential Latinos in Georgia Award, presented by the Georgia Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. Her philanthropic endeavors span the areas of sustainability, diversity, equity, and inclusion, interreligious advocacy, urban agriculture, and public speaking. Thanks for joining us today, Sofia.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Selena. It's such a pleasure to be here and quite an honor. Good morning or good afternoon, depending where you are, because I know this is an international forum. And thank you so much to all of our panelists for joining us. We're going to go and get started with Mark Zahran. Mark is the co-founder and CEO of Yasai Ag, a Swiss company empowering people to grow more with less and create circular food production systems in cities and regions lacking sufficient agricultural resources such as fresh water or fertile arable land. Mark holds an MSc in architecture from ETH Zurich and UNA Mexico City and has experience working in a multitude of architecture offices. Mark has also served as a junior project leader at Gruenig for Smart Building Systems. Thank you for joining us today, Mark.
Thank you very much.
It's absolutely, Mark. We're going to move on to Dr. Nina Wolff. Dr. Nina Wolff currently holds a master's degree in European law and a PhD in European and international environmental law. Further professional positions include a position as a research assistant at the Environmental Research Office in Leipzig, as well as positions as project manager and consultant for several NGOs, like the German Environmental Aid and the US Pew Charitable Trust. In June of 2021, Nina became chairwoman of Slow Food Germany and is currently a member of the advisory board of Slow Food International. Dr. Wolff, it is an honor to have you joining us today. We are going to move on to Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. We're going to move on to Mario Cambardella. Mario is a landscape architect, environmental planner, and former urban agriculture director for the city of Atlanta. His current project is Servscape.net, which partners with responsible horticulture farmers across Georgia to supply Atlanta residents with access to food producing, pollinating, and native plants. Mario led the Atlanta Initiative, a comprehensive and systematic approach towards strengthening the local food system. Mario was named 40 under 40 by Georgia Trend Magazine, the University of Georgia, and serves on the board of the Georgia Green Industry Association, and is a member of the American Planning Association and American Society of Landscape Architects. Welcome, Mario. It's so good to see you again. Last but certainly not least, Sagdrina Jalal has devoted much of her work to advancing food justice and supporting local food economies. In 2013, she started Project Generation Gap, which supports intergenerational efforts that build strong communities. Sagdrina went on to become the executive director of the Georgia Farmers Market Association. Sagdrina's commitment to community-driven solutions led her to participate in CCI's 2016 Food Innovation Fellowship, and her relationship with CCI has flourished ever since. She went on to become the co-director of the Civic Innovations Fellowship and Residency Program, and in January of 2020, she became a full-time staff member as the Senior Director of Programs and Partnerships. Welcome, Sagdrina. It is so wonderful to have you here. So this morning, everyone, we're going to get started. And really, in this panel, we want to talk a little bit about all of your backgrounds are so different, but united with that common theme of sustainable urban agriculture. So I'd like to open it up to all of you panelists with what sparked your passion for urban agriculture. We'll have Mark go first, then Dr. Nina, Mario, and then Sagdrina. So Mark, kick us off, please.
All right, so thank you very much for having me. It actually started in my case when I was studying in Mexico City. As you mentioned, I studied architecture, and I didn't know what to do with my life, so I was reading a book from Dr. Dixon Despommier. He's a professor at the Columbia University in New York. And he wrote a book which is called Vertical Farming, How to Feed the World in the 21st Century. And this basically gave me the sparks, because if we look at architecture, architectures are masters of space. And it's just insane how much space we actually require to feed ourselves of this planet. And there's right now actually going a paradigm shift going on within the architecture scene, where the focus is shifted from the urban towards the countryside, which makes almost 40% of all ice-free land, whereas the urban only makes 3%. So most people will live in 3% of the land masses, but require more than 40% to feed themselves. So that's where I thought I should actually think about that.
Wow, that is incredible. And that's something that I think so many of us may not be aware of. And I think most people aren't aware of those dynamics. So Dr. Wolff, I'd love to have you answer that question. What sparked your passion for urban agriculture?
Yes, that's an interesting question, because me, as a lawyer, as a policy person, I rather come from the big concepts, from asking myself all the time how to convince people of the necessity to protect the environment, how to protect how to convince decision makers of this necessity. And then I joined Slow Food as an organization that is advocating good, clean and fair food for all people. And then I actually, I was always a gardener myself, but I never did the link actually between gardening and policy. And then all of a sudden I really understood that we are having all these sophisticated methods of educating people, of educating decision makers. But you take people just one day into a garden and you let them do the gardening, and then you let them do the cooking, and it changes everything. And I think that gardens are a very powerful instrument, and that we can learn a lot all together with them.
Absolutely. And I love how you talked about the intersection of policy and gardening, because I think, again, we don't recognize the intersectionality that we all exist in. So thank you so much for that perspective. Mario, I'm going to turn it to you. What sparked your interest in urban agriculture?
I grew up in Atlanta, and I think it was starting very young, eating a blackberry bush and recognizing what just the landscape around us can provide. Fast forward to I found a career in landscape architecture, where you get to shape the world, this built world environment, and then recognizing how little we were doing with that responsibility, and then recognizing that we could provide more food and engagement through the landscape design, and that just sparked sort of this career path in urban agriculture. Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's amazing. And fun fact, Mario and I know each other personally. So it's really amazing just to see. We both live in Atlanta, and it's just been amazing just to see all of the work you've done. Atlanta is known, for those of you who don't know, Atlanta, our nickname is City in a Forest. So we're really committed to preserving our tree canopy, and Mario's just done some really amazing work with that. All right. And Sagdrina, what sparked your passion for urban agriculture?
Well, interestingly enough, I did not really understand that my passion was around urban agriculture initially. I had a personal health kind of crisis that led me to shop at local farmers markets and to get to know growers, and realized that there was a connection not only between my health crisis and my father's exposure to Agent Orange during Vietnam, but also the solution to to my health being restored was in nutrient dense food sourced locally. And I realized that this was information that I had no idea prior to having this issue. I did not know that farmers were just in my backyard, and I certainly didn't know that there was not a huge opportunity to feel better and live healthier and stronger. So as I dug deeper, my background is in education. I was a teacher in Gwinnett County Public Schools for a long time. And as I dug deeper, I realized that there was a huge conversation taking place. I participated in the 2014 Black and Latinx farmer immersion program at Soulfire Farm. And that's where I realized that the conversation was rooted in justice. And started centering my work in both in food justice and in the greater social justice movement that has continued to date. So I'm, very much rooted in the food community, although my my professional pathways have taken me to have this conversation at a policy level with the Center for Civic Innovation, and to really focus on inequality across the board in sectors. Food will always remain dearest and nearest to my heart.
Yeah, and thank you so much for that. And again, I'm so happy you brought that up. The systemic inequity that exists within access to fresh food, that's a huge issue when we see, this notion of food deserts coming up, areas where people live and they don't have access to fresh food, vegetables. And when you combine that with transit as well, if you don't have reliable transportation and you're 63, you have arthritis, how much food can you realistically carry on the bus, wait for the bus? I mean, it's things like you have to think of, okay, how does this impact other people? And that's part of that social justice, equity lens that we all need to really look at when we think of urban agriculture accessibility. So thank you so much for just all of your work. And thank you all for just coming in with your different gifts and views and really being able to add to this conversation. So, Sagdrina, you provided a wonderful segue. And this is a question for all of our panelists. With urbanization on the rise and the impact of climate change, how do you each tailor your approach to increasing awareness of urban agriculture within your respective communities, field of work? Dr. Wolff, I'll have you go first, and I'll repeat the question because I know it's long.
So I think that it is still not known to everybody that really greenhouse gas emissions, a quarter of them comes in somehow is linked to our food. And I think this is such the fact that this has such a huge impact, the way we provide ourselves with food, the way we grow food, and the decisions we are making. It is so important to make this even more public. And this is certainly one of the tasks of So Food, one big part of our work, to educate people and decision makers on that, and to also show them what they can do to make things better. And this is actually important because on the one hand, decision makers in towns, in communities, they have the possibilities to make things better by simple decisions, and to do something not only for the town, and to have a very direct effect by greening the cities, but also by giving people the possibility to be self-efficient. This has a psychological dimension, in fact, because people suffer from the fact that they feel helpless in face of such a huge crisis. And with urban gardening, they have the possibility to have a contribution to do something. So I think this is important, and also to have food councils in town to build up their own food strategies, to involve people, and to to contribute to food sovereignty in a way like that as well.
I love that. I love that term, food sovereignty. I'm going to coin that. I really like that, Dr. Wolff. Mario, talk to me a little bit about, urbanization on the rise, impact of climate change. How are you tailoring your approach to increasing awareness of urban agriculture within your respective community field of work? And then we'll have Sagdrina and Marco after.
Well, I've been a part of a lot of robust conversations about what pattern of urbanization is better for the world. And I get tired of the same kind of back and forth and this way is better and that way is better, when I saw many opportunities that maybe a conversation we were not having. And especially as it relates to what or how we're how we're looking at and what sort of effects conventional landscape has on the world and our environment around us. So I always saw that we could transform landscape to be more food producing. And food producing is for who? Food producing for me, you, for a particular user group and within our cities. But also I saw food producing landscapes as for birds and bees and butterflies, and really sort of mending this whole food web and creating this kind of connectivity with everything around us through food producing landscapes. A lot of these calories come from the sun and water and these plants and then insects, and then, working your way back to us. So we always have this sort of immediate response to the human condition, what we need to do for human, but sometimes we're not looking at the bigger picture and how the bigger picture can be supportive for the human condition. And so what, as urban ag director, I was really cognizant of how can we expand the conversation to incorporate food producing landscape. When we started with the parks department, how can we look at a park and say there could be a food producing, be very, very intentional with a food producing landscape. And once you say that, then it really limits what type of pesticides, what type of herbicides, what type of how you treat. Because if it's all going to be food, you have to look at it very, very differently. Both the type of water that you use, the way you manage it, the way you maintain it. So by these types of sort of put your stake in the ground and say, this is what we're going to do, it requires a whole new set of protocols and ideas that have a ripple effect on many other things. So that's been my North Star. How can I create more food producing landscapes through use of natives or edibles or many different types? And I believe that, as we're bringing this awareness, we have to look at it through how we market it. So it's not necessarily what is. So I can have a plant, but I need to have a purpose. And then for Servscape, we were working on a 4P kind of situation. We're sort of about place, plants, purpose, and the people. So it's all four of these things that we have to weave in to everything that we're trying to do so that we can really hopefully resonate with the audience we're trying to engage, and they respond to it in a way in which makes them proponents of this food producing landscape sort of journey that we're trying to get them on. So I'll leave it there for now.
All right, so
yeah, thanks. Take it. Take it away, Mark.
Thank you very much. It's awesome to have a landscape architect also in this conversation. And I think if we talk about cities and urban, the term urban itself, if you look at the history of cities and civilizations, agriculture is actually the very basic reason why we settled down and why we created cities in the first place. So cities, if we go back 10,000 years to Mesopotamia and so on, were and included integrated agriculture from the very beginning, because that's the reason why we settled down as a human species, right? So if you look back urban agriculture is not a new phenomenon. We just somehow industrialized agriculture to a degree where we created so much distance between our food production system and the consumer itself. It has become a very, very strange relationship, I would say. And what we do at Yasai, we are a startup that offers indoor vertical farming as a service based on circular economy. And here we try to reuse various urban spaces like bunkers or industrial halls, which are empty, to integrate agriculture back into the city. And this is actually something which we empower other people and where we empower others to grow more with less in a very nice urban settlement and environment. And most people enjoy that very much because you have a lot of benefits, like health benefits, sustainable benefits. You need less resources, but also the cities itself become more resilient. You could see that very, very well in Brooklyn when there was the hurricane back then, 2011. Not sure. I'm not so bewildered by that. And yeah, you could actually see that Brooklyn has become a very resilient part of New York because there's a lot of urban agriculture initiatives going on, whereas most other regions and districts were really had troubles to supply. So that's I think this is how we promote it, at least here in Switzerland. But we go beyond that and actually think that vertical farming will be an integrated infrastructure of the smart cities of tomorrow. So there's a lot of side effects and benefits from that if we integrate agriculture to a certain degree back. So yeah, that's our approach.
And I love how you talk about, we've been doing this for thousands of years. And Mark, we've got a lot of questions for you from the audience that we'll be addressing later. So audience, I know you've got a lot of questions about what does vertical farming look like. So stay tuned. We will get to audience questions later on in this panel. Sagdrina, we're going to close this question out with you. With urbanization on the rise and the impact of climate change, how do you tailor your approach to increasing awareness of urban agriculture within your community field of work?
It's a great question. I've been sitting, listening, and thinking about Nina's comment around food sovereignty, and really, I can't separate the opportunity for communities to make decisions for themselves without considering the impact of the way that communities have been developed, the impact of gentrification on communities, the way that poor and impoverished communities have been relegated to unhealthy land and soil, and the need to both empower, inform, and engage those communities in the opportunities to solve the issues and challenges. Because the reality is that communities know what communities need, and oftentimes there's just a lack of opportunity to listen and to base the solutions on the direction of the community. And one of those, I think the biggest issues is surrounding land loss. Our country, I'm in Georgia, I'm in the South, I'm in Atlanta with Mario and Sofia, and I very much feel that we have, we have a strong legacy of resilience in this country and in our region, but it's also come at a price. And so the reality is that Black farmers, Black landowners have not been respected and valued. And so I think our approach in both at CCI as well as my work with the Georgia Farmers Market Association, serving on farmers market coalitions board for a while and now advising them on the creation of an anti-racist toolkit, we're really focusing on how do we not just engage Black farmers and the Black community, but how do we demonstrate a community that really and truly reflects the needs and of the community and redistributes power. So that's kind of where our work is centered around. When I was a fellow with CCI and I was in the Food Fellowship Program, it was very it was really kind of life-changing to hear the growers in my city, the urban farmers, just continue to express how difficult it is to consistently grow and support their communities without the support of the local government and also without access to land, consistent access to land. So I think that's where things start. And I saw that resonated throughout the country with my time with Soulfire. It continues to be a challenge today.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, Sagdrina, I mean, you're so right. I think it's really easy for people to say, oh, well, you know, if you want to farm, go and do it. There's grants, resources, but we have to think of systemic inequity and how that impacts who gets access to what resources. And thank you so much for, you know, breathing life into that and bringing this up, because this is such a crucial component of this conversation. So we're going to switch it over to Mario. This is a question for you. Mario, you've had a career working in city government. You're now CEO of Servscape, so you're an entrepreneur. What parallels do you see between government and the private sector, and how can cities move towards incorporating more green infrastructure?
Well, it's looking at the value of the land and how it can perform. I mean, I was a big proponent of the land has a performance value. And so if we think of it as how can every piece of land participate on whether it's green infrastructure or food production, all these things that need the city to run. City needs input. They need food, they need people, they need transportation, all these things. And we need to look at our infrastructure in more innovative ways. And I'll give you just an example. The city of Atlanta was basically had to take on a number of properties in which poor housing housing builders built houses in floodplain. And so over a series of decades, those houses had to be torn down, and that land was bequeathed back to the city to deal with. And they became places for refuge, like people were doing illegal dumping, and there was a lot of weed management because you couldn't build a house on it. Well, what else could we build? We could produce food. So 10 properties got designated within the Atlanta Grows a Lot program of these properties that could not build a house any longer. And so find the highest and greatest value for these land, and then institutionalize those programs, bring food into government because it is a part of the function of the city and the health, welfare, and safety of the city. And so I was really glad that the City of Atlanta agreed to do an urban agriculture director position, because I believe that just as we have a Department of Agriculture for the nation, we need to have department and offices of urban agriculture at the state and city levels. It's important to everyone. So one other way we can migrate some of these specific functions of the city, the power line easements that run through, gas line easements that run through, they bring energy to people. Well, so does food. So if the sole purpose is to bring energy, a calorie is just a unit of energy, and there's ways to cohabitate some of these functions for farming, for production of food, and the conveyance of energy.
Wow, and that's so right. And I'll let everybody know, where I live in Atlanta, there's a power line easement that goes right through my complex, and we have a small community garden with several plots, and it's a great way of using that land. And Georgia Power, we work with them. They don't they don't mow over our garden, but it's such a beautiful way of, again, promoting urban agriculture and just the amount of birds, bees, natural pollinators. We have honeybees. I mean, that's a great use of that land that, like you said, would be otherwise dead space. Mark, as founder and CEO of Yes I Ag, can you explain what Yes I Ag does and what circular agriculture is?
Yes, of course. First of all, I completely agree with Mario. I think we should look at agriculture or food production also as an infrastructure. It is energy that we produce in a different form. And we at YesI, we create vertical indoor farms. So what is vertical farming in the first place? We grow on several layers stacked upon each other on a hydroponic basis. And like this, we can grow more with less. So we can grow 200 times more per square meter compared to traditional methods all year round, with 95% less fresh water because we recycle all of the water that we require, and without any chemical pesticides, and in best cases, without any food miles, right where people live. And this is basically the beauty, and this is what we offer. And our key focus and USP at YesI is basically the circularity part. So vertical farming so far has been a food production system and was looked at as a food factory, a new way of producing food in industrial ways. But the way we look at farming is more as an infrastructure for smart cities of tomorrow. So what do? We do not just produce fresh food for the people living in the smart cities, but we can also reuse waste streams, different waste streams, to promote plant growth. And this is where the circularity aspect come in. To give you some examples, we can reuse actively CO2 and capture it, put it into our growth chambers. Our plants love this; they grow even faster, and it is increasing even the economical value. Another example is nutrients. So we recycle the wastewater of the cities, and we can recycle nutrients like phosphor and nitrogen that plants need, and we can reuse them in the vertical farms to grow the plants. So this is all about the circular economy aspects, where we create more value in the local economies. Additionally to the land value, for instance, we can reuse empty halls, create new jobs, new values for the real estate itself, and there we can also create circularities. So it's if we think about symbiosis between plants and humans living together. And this is what our aim is at YesI. So we think really in circular approaches and circular economy, and very collaborative. So we are always open to learn from others and to also integrate new and different technologies for our growth. I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, Mark, that was wonderful. And that's really the way of the future, because our population continues to grow. So we have to think, what does the future look like? And especially with soil and land degradation. I mean, hydroponic farming, that really is the way of the future, vertical farming, because I think that is something that is so easily done in an urban setting where you are constrained with how much space you have. Dr. Wolff, Slow Food has a robust international experience in promoting urban gardening and small-scale agriculture. What do you see as essential when advocating for urban agriculture? And what is the concept of a slow food community garden? And how is gardening political?
Yeah, well, indeed, slow food has experience with a lot of garden projects all over the world. In fact, we have thousands of gardens in Africa, but also in Europe and in the US. So these garden projects are always expression of the community, as you say. They are community gardens, and Mario mentioned connectivity, and I think this is a key word also for a slow food community garden, because it connects people to the place where they live. It connects people with the community. It connects them with the local biodiversity. And this form of community is an inclusive project. It brings in everybody, regardless of where people come from this town, from somewhere else, what's their social background or other characteristics. It is not important. It brings in the experience of the old. It brings in the curiousness of the young, the creativity of teenagers, and everybody can come together and learn something. So it's a learning experience. People learn about, well, as you said, what people have done for thousands of years. We have lost it. We have lost the connectivity with our food. We see it on the supermarket shelves or in freezers, and they start to learn and to appreciate the food and also the land where it comes from. And at the same time, they take common decisions. So this is also about democracy, and they gain back their right to decide on what they are actually growing and what they're eating and what kind of food they want to have and what they want to do with it together. So it's a community project with local biodiversity at the center of the project, and so it is. It contributes to biodiversity and to the social diversity at the same time. I think that's important. And well, when we advocate for those gardens, it's exactly this concept of food sovereignty that we put at the core of our argumentation, because I think that is something important for people in cities and for decision makers as well, that people get back this kind of sovereignty. And yes, it is political, because, well, just as every choice we're doing, every choice as consumers we're doing nowadays is political, because it has such a huge impact on climate and on the social well-being of people all around the world. So it is a political decision to garden, to invest time into gardening, and to bring back, in fact, what is so essential to our hands, and to promote this and bring it via the community policies, bring it to the food councils, and to a kind of local strategy, and then to multiply these strategies and to scale up, and and can change our way of eating and of living a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really want to hone in on what you said, Dr. Wolff, about we have lost that connection with our food. I grew up on a small farm in rural North Georgia, and my dad would always talk about, he said, people are so we're nature deficient. We don't know where our food comes from, what it looks like, and just the myriad of uses that, our food has, and that relationship with not only the land, but our food. Sagdrina, I want to turn over to you. I know that the mayor of Atlanta, she recently released a new bill that is going to, a new piece of legislation really, allowing farmers to sell directly to customers. How does that impact accessibility and equity? And what steps can cities adopt to make local produce more accessible and just really like those good policies that we can advocate for? We've got the mayoral races here in Atlanta going on, all of our municipal races. So kind of wanting, you to answer a little bit of that. Like, what can we do to advocate?
Yeah, I think that's a really great start. Just kind of acknowledging the value and importance of supporting a direct relationship between consumers and farmers is huge. And we saw that happening organically during the pandemic. And when we were sheltering in place, there was so much conversation between neighbors sharing, whether it's their own food in their gardens and making things available, getting into gardening, and farmers, farmers doing home deliveries. Farmers markets were able to adjust very quickly. There are already open air markets and ways for folks to have access to food. So they were able to make adjustments to make it safe to shop at the farmers market, having hand washing stations and mask requirements. But really and truly, the nature of a farmers market really lends itself to community contribution. The challenge always is, how do you make sure that the full spectrum of the community is represented at the market, or that those who maybe do not have the financial means to pay for the specialty crops that are sold at farmers markets or directly by farmers, right? And so I think that's where local municipalities really have to support their programs, and there are lots of models across the country of cities providing vouchers for, I know in Washington, D.C., they have a senior voucher program. There is an organization called Wholesome Wave that doubles the value of SNAP EBT. But of course, you have to be involved in that program in order to be able to utilize that. Many of Georgia farmers markets have those types of Wholesome Wave at markets. But I think, really and truly offering an opportunity for it to have those decisions to be made on a community level basis. I live in Kirkwood here in Atlanta. It's a community of the city. And one of the things that happened that was sparked in our community was a need to grow fruit trees in our community. So those of us that could purchase fruit trees, we did so, and those who maybe needed fruit trees donated in their communities, that was done as well. And we're really working on getting more direct conversation with some of the legacy residents who have the knowledge, who've been growing in this community forever. So I'm looking forward to that. But one thing that I'm super excited about is that there's a market in our community that offers food on a sliding scale. So I think supporting those kinds of programming, raising awareness, not only to those who may have a need and access to and increase access to local food, but also those that are in a position to provide that accessibility, whether it be on a policy level or on just a neighbor to neighbor basis.
And a lot of people had questions about, a lot of people wanted to really know, what can we be advocating for, especially as we interact with mayoral candidates, city council candidates. I know there was a green space forum here in Atlanta, but people really wanted to know, like, how do you advocate? Really quick answer for you on that.
Was it to me?
Yes, that's to you. And then Mario, you can answer as well. Everyone, we're in the portion where we're taking questions from the audience right now. Yes. So Sagdrina, I would love for you to answer this since you're working in this role, and then Mario, and then Dr. Wolff and Mark, feel free to jump in as well.
I think that, Atlanta has, and we've been examining at the Center for Civic Innovation, the MPU structure. And so there's an embedded way for local communities in our city to really get behind what's needed in their area. I think when you look at the mayoral election, and when you look even at the MPU structure, you can't help but realize that even though there is that embedded way for folks to weigh in on what's needed, it's not accessible to everyone, and it doesn't work for everyone. So I think making sure that that we get behind an examination of structures like NPU systems. Neighborhood planning units is what it stands for. I know many cities have them, but looking and considering how impactful are they, how effective are they, are the resources allocated evenly from one planning unit in the case of Atlanta to another, and is it within each planning unit in Atlanta, what's the representation like from that community? So do we have all the players at the table, those that are impacted by the table, and is the power distributed evenly? So those are some of the things that I think folks could really, really get involved in and get excited behind if there was an opportunity to do so.
Wonderful, thank you. Would anyone else like to opine on that question? And really, I think that we can also look at this question in the sense of how can official state and municipal authorities help educate and implement topics of food, economic, and social security in their planning when we talk about this, because it is a crisis. It is a crisis. So I'd pose that question to all of you panelists. You can jump in and answer as you like.
Yeah, just right off the bat, I think that coordination is key. Communication and coordination is key. So amongst many different government levels. So, on some of these projects, you want to have local representation of like the district or the council person, or even the community association president or NPU leadership, but then have that same sort of issue, that North Star, rise all the way up, because you want the state rep there as well, and you want the county, and depending on how big of the problem you're facing, that they all are on the same page with the local community and what their goal is. And then they should be rising that up to, because other communities and other states and other counties might be experiencing the same thing. So again, these are core challenges. Food. This is for the nourishment of our people. And so these, we had been using the food desert metric. Maybe that's not the best one anymore. And we need to get to the table and allow a groundswell of thought leaders like Sagdrina and others to come up with another North Star, so that they can rise through from the people on the ground that are experiencing these issues. Let this stuff rise up through all these different government, all these different levels, so that everybody's on board the same page, because it's not their agenda, it's the people's agenda. Mm-hmm. And that's where it needs to start. So that kind of communication, clear, concise communication and coordination, that's what I think is needed right now.
Yeah, I agree. Policies are very, very helpful in accelerating this transition towards a more sustainable food system. But in fact, we actually do our votings every day when we go by, when we shop, for instance, right? So instead of just voting once or twice or 3 times a year, depending on the context you live in, you vote every day by choosing consciously in the supermarkets or on the fresh markets what you buy. And if you will shift personally, even the 100 people right now in this audience can have an impact by going more local, buying more local. And this will then affect, it's like the butterfly effect in some ways.
Yes, and I think that municipalities have another very powerful tool at their hands, and that is public procurement of food for canteens. And this plays a major role as well. And this canteens, especially canteens in schools, are places of learning. And if you make the choice to have regional food and biologically grown food in your canteens as a decision makers, and you can at the same time create a place where people learn about the ways food is grown and how important it is to attach importance to that. So this is something on the rise as well.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dr. Wolff. And Mark, this question came in for you. What types of crops are most suitable for vertical farming?
All right, thank you for this question. It's depending on the context, once again. So it's an economical question. You could actually grow even trees with hydroponics. If you look back in Tenochtitlan, the Aztecs did this in the ancient city which they built on a lake. So they even grew trees which were floating in the water. But it's more an economical question. So for the context of Switzerland, mostly it's leafy greens and herbs. And here I would really like to stress that vertical farming is not a solution for everything and every crop. It is complementary. And we will still need traditional methods of farming, and we will have to basically improve all kind of systems that we have right now to be able to go more towards food sustainability in the future. So it's a complementary system which is good for herbs, leafy greens, things with a lot of vitamins and nutrients. But until we can really also grow proteins, for instance, and carbohydrates in such systems, there's still a long way to go. So for your understanding, vertical farming is quite a young industry. It's about 10 years old now. And it's still in the baby phase and emerging. And there's a lot of experiments going on all the time. So yeah, just to not give you too much hope on this technology, I think the biggest leverage that we can do is basically change habits. So our slogan is grow more with less, which is basically a technology solution, but the habit would be less is more. So yeah. And it's up to you guys.
Yeah.
And to every individual, I would say.
Yeah. And I really think, and what you all said, granted, when we vote, when we cast a vote, depending on what country you live in, because this is an international panel, but that notion of you vote every day with how you choose, where you choose to buy your food. I know within the past year, I became part of a local, food delivery program called Fresh Harvest. They source locally. All the food comes within, from the Southeast organic farmers who adhere to, traditional farming mechanisms. And really it helps support small farmers. And so that's something that I did. So I would highly encourage everyone to, explore what kind of options are available to you. And, your vote is your voice, and you cast that vote every day, depending on how you shop, where you shop, and, who are you supporting when you do that? This is for everybody. And I think this may be the last question. What's the biggest challenge you all have encountered when advocating for more sustainable ways of farming? Mario, I'll go ahead and let you get started. Yeah. Then we'll go to Nina, Sagdrina, and then Mark.
So let me make sure I got the right question. What's the biggest hurdles?
Yeah. What's one of the top biggest hurdle that you personally have encountered when trying to get people on board with the notion of urban agriculture as it pertains to, the field that you work in?
Well, as it pertains to the field that I work in, I think it's just knowledge. I think the community that I'm working with now has a lot of access to land, which is the problem for urban farming outside of the community that I'm working on. But the community I'm working on is really just knowledge. There's like their grandfather knew how to do this, or their grandmother, but like their parents sort of discarded it. And now we see this groundswell of sort of interest, and my grandmother knew how to do this. I remember being introduced to this, but I really don't know how. How can I learn? How can I be a part of this? And we're looking for access to information as well, access to education and experiences, without sort of fear factor and all this thing of the fear of failure. It's being uncomfortable with a little bit of failure and understanding that this is a lifetime of learning to grow a food producing landscape in my world. So access to education and experiences.
Wonderful. Dr. Wolff, then Sagdrina, then Mark.
Okay. Well, I think the biggest hurdle is indeed the narrative that is still in the heads of many decision makers that, the industrial agriculture will fix hunger in the world. And these kind of really hard arguments, it's difficult to break them down because we know somehow that it's possible to live in a different way, but we have not completely shown it yet. So I think it is really on the shoulders of individuals to go this way and to show that it's possible to live in a different way. And to vote every day for this, and as we say, to vote with your fork, and to really show it all and over again. Because in the head of politicians, many of them understand the issue, I think, but only a few of them see it as a priority. So I think it's important that there are individuals, passionate individuals, showing that it's a good way of living.
Excellent. Sagdrina?
Yeah, I think the greatest challenge has been just the disconnect between consumers, shoppers, and growers, farmers, and our, particularly, I can say in Georgia, definitely the case. I don't think that most people really know that when you go to the grocery store, the vast majority of the food that you're buying was not grown in our state, if no less, in your local community. And that just because something has market in their name does not mean that it has any connection to local food. Sometimes it's been traveling from all over the world, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but it definitely, when we think about urban agriculture and we think about sustainability and sovereignty and community kind of connection to those things, I think it's super important for folks to make decisions based on accurate information, and also to understand the challenges that local growers face when they are not really given pathways to sell in any larger capacity or transition from selling in small capacities to larger capacities in their local communities. So I think that's one of the biggest hurdles.
Excellent. Yeah, totally agree with you. Mark?
I think in our case, it's the idea that healthy food should be cheap. I think that's the wrong perception, perhaps. And what we promote is basically the idea of pay the farmer, not the doctor, because everything you eat is also medicine. Everything you take into your body will either heal you or kill you. So, if we start with a different perception in regards to food, and sustainably produced food will be a bit more expensive because it integrates all the externalities which are not included with unsustainable food. So here I think this idea needs to change a bit, and this perception, and we can see that many people spend millions on health issues instead of just starting where it actually started, with their diet. And by spending a bit more into your healthy diet, you will end up spending less for medicine and disease cures. So that's our view, and we would really like to promote that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, we have come to the end of our panel. Please, everybody, warm virtual round of applause for our panelists for just taking time to, really come with all of their gifts, their knowledge, their talents. Thank you all so much for being part of this panel. Thank you for sharing all of your knowledge, and thank you for all of the good work you do, because, work like this it's hard, right? It's hard. Sometimes it's countercultural. And so thank you for advocating for, our Earth, and, we're all global citizens. So thank you all so much.
I can't thank you all enough for that amazing panel discussion. So thanks to each of our panelists and our moderator. We'll spend the next 15 minutes hearing from students and organizations via short 3-minute lightning talks, after which we'll take a brief break before reconvening for this afternoon's MasterClass, a sustainable food tutorial called Changing the Food System, One Smoothie at a Time.
Our first lightning talk will be given by Faatiha Aayat, a 9-year-old Bangladeshi girl currently living in New York. Faatiha is a child rights activist and climate campaigner who has spoken on an international stage and founded her own organization, Child, where she works for climate, health, information, learning, and development. Welcome, Faatiha.
One thing I need to make crystal clear today at the beginning of my speech. When we are hungry, we are not happy with just the mere piece of recipe itself. Instead, we want the real food. And this is the main problem of today's world. We have lots of good-looking, well-decorated, adequately narrated pieces of recipes, like the Paris Agreement, UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, the Kyoto Protocol, the Copenhagen Agreement, the Cancun Treaty, etc. And surprisingly, the world leaders are happy with this. They are less concerned that instead, we, the citizens of this world, need the real food, which is a clean climate. Hello and assalamu alaikum. My name is Faatiha Aayat. I am a 9-year-old child rights activist and climate campaigner. I have already spoken in the United Nations and in the University of Harvard, where I have talked and gave speeches about the implications of global warming on climate refugees. I am really happy, and it is an immense pleasure for me to talk in this prestigious program of today's Global Climate Action Symposium. But the topics and points and events that I'll be talking about today is not an immense pleasure and does not make me feel proud. Today, I am so surprised that everyone is talking about the Earth climate only. But I have a strong feeling that in order to fix our Earth climate, we first need to fix our political climate. Let me explain to you what I am saying. In Brazil, Jair Bolsonaro wants to open the Amazon to new commercial activity. And then again in Russia, Vladimir Putin presides over a vast, powerful petrostate. In India, Narendra Modi is pushing for coal projects home and abroad. In, let's say, China, Xi Jinping is playing no role at all in order to stop the air pollution. In North Korea, Kim Jong-un is testing nuclear weapons in the oceans. In Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro is spreading mining area every day. In Iran, Ali Khamenei is attacking the oil tanks, which is causing them to leak into the Strait of Hormuz. In Philippines, Rodrigo Duterte is selling minerals, wildlife, and marine resources. Hello, leaders. What is this? Is this a joke? Can you see us, the children? Can you see us, the youth? Can you see us? Don't you know that these decisions from you leaders are literally pounding us into the living fossils? Please, if my voice sounded a bit harsh today, please do not take that as my rudeness, but as my frustration. Because me and my generation must bite this bullet. We must swallow this bitter pill. Please, allow us to breathe. Please, allow us to sing. Thank you and assalamu alaikum.
Thank you for that bold call to action, Faatiha. One such group working towards climate solutions is the Georgia Climate Project, who we will hear from next. The Georgia Climate Project is building a statewide network to address the questions, what does a change in climate mean for Georgia, and what can we do about it?
This storm hit right before harvest, meaning all 2,200 acres of this cotton field is essentially useless.
Georgia's climate is changing.
The Georgia Forestry Commission showing much of the metro area in the extreme risk zone.
18 of the 19 warmest years have been since 2000. But it's not just heat. Climate change is about changing extremes. Droughts are more frequent and intense. Too much rain from the rainstorms, higher sea levels, more intense hurricanes.
Georgians will be facing a compound threat that is going to be challenging communities, not just in 2050 or 2100, but this year and next year and the following year.
Some people are going to be particularly vulnerable to climate change: elderly, lower income, people without economic resources, children under 5.
We need to think about solutions that are helping our most vulnerable populations stay safe during a changing climate in Georgia.
Climate change is one of this century's defining challenges. We're seeing some really exciting signs of creative and innovative solutions that are positioning Georgia to play a leading role in addressing this challenge. One very exciting thing that is being done in Georgia is around smart irrigation. How much water is applied, where it's applied, and when it's applied. Georgia's gone from a state where we have about 5 megawatts of solar energy deployed around the state to nearly 2,000 megawatts. Another very exciting area for Georgia is electric vehicles. As recently as 2015, Georgia ranked 3rd in the country for electric vehicle registrations. These innovations have tremendous potential to be a really important solution as we in the state and as others around us think about how to respond to the impacts of a changing climate.
Remember, you can learn more about the inspiring work by the Georgia Climate Project at www.georgiaclimateproject.org. Next, we'll delve into a Georgia climate story and learn how Concrete Jungle, a local Atlanta organization, is working to reduce food waste. Stay tuned for Concrete Jungle's sustainable smoothie making tutorial during this afternoon's MasterClass.
Concrete Jungle brings people together to harvest the abundance of overlooked and underutilized produce growing around our city. Food waste has had huge impacts on our current climate crisis. Concrete Jungle recovers food that would otherwise be wasted by purchasing ugly produce from Georgia farmers, gleaning leftover produce from farmers' fields, and harvesting fruit trees in the city. Since Concrete Jungle was founded 11 years ago, we've distributed over 181,000 pounds of fresh, peak season produce to our community members who need it the most. Food recovery is a powerful tool for reducing emissions and the impacts of climate change. My name is Nicole Fields-Kyle, Program Manager at Concrete Jungle, and that's why climate is on my mind.
Don't forget to tune in to this afternoon's Sustainable Food Masterclass, where you can learn how to change the food system one smoothie at a time with local produce. You can find the recipes online at bit.ly/GCAS2021 and also in the event chat. Our final spotlight focuses on sustainable farming solutions in the tropics, as explained by the Inga Foundation.
Pero no tenemos otra opción para poder sembrar.
Thank you to all the students and organizations that shared their work with us today. We'll take a short 15-minute break before this afternoon's masterclass, which will begin at 12 o'clock noon, Eastern Daylight Time. Make sure to have your blenders ready as we learn about sustainable food options and share sustainable recipes. You can find a link to the smoothie recipes in the chat. See you at noon.
Welcome back, everyone. To conclude today's events, we'll embark on today's masterclass. A masterclass called Changing the Food System One Smoothie at a Time. In the next half hour, we'll hear from some incredible sustainable food experts and learn how to make our own sustainable smoothies. We've put the recipes in the event chat, so please do look at those. We'll include time for audience questions, so feel free to keep adding those to the chat and the Q&A. First, I'd like to welcome Peter Zimmerli to speak. Peter is the Consul General of Switzerland in Atlanta. He has lived and worked in Switzerland, Brazil, Democratic Republic of Congo, Germany, Italy, and Singapore. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Selena, and very good afternoon to you all. It is a great pleasure to join you today in this masterclass, and we are delighted to be once again part of the Global Climate Action Symposium. It is not only a pleasure, but also a duty for Switzerland to participate and support all efforts to mitigate climate change. As an alpine country, Switzerland is particularly affected. Our glaciers have been retreating over the past 100 years, and the temperatures of our lakes and rivers have been rising. We urgently need to stop this trend. The Swiss government set the target that Switzerland's greenhouse gas emissions should fall to net zero by 2050, and we committed to gradually leave the fossil fuel era behind and create a green economy based on renewable energy, sustainable transport, and energy efficiency. Of course, we cannot reach this ambitious goal alone, and we need the global community to work together in order to reduce global warming. This is why I want to emphasize our commitment together with our European colleagues and our American partners here in Atlanta through the Global Climate Action Symposium. I appreciate the partnership with the Global Change Program at Georgia Tech, and I wish to express a particular thank you to Professor Kim Cobb and her team for their dedication and hard work in preparation of this symposium. We have seen this symposium grow from year to year, and I really hope that we will see many more editions of this event in the future. It is a powerful and essential tool in our common battle against climate change. It is a great platform to bring European and American scientists, entrepreneurs, and climate advocates together. A wonderful example for this is the Smoothie Masterclass co-produced by the World Food System Center in Zurich and Concrete Jungle in Atlanta. Thank you to Iris and Kanaha, the scientists from Switzerland, and Shani, who was the driving force at ETH in organizing this class. Also, a big thanks to Nicole, Marcus, and Claire from Concrete Jungle for the fun and yet informative smoothie tutorial. And with this, let's get started. Back to you, Selena.
Thank you so much for those kind words. And I'm thrilled to introduce our next expert, Dr. Iris Haberkorn. Iris is a food science graduate of ETH Zurich, where she is currently pursuing a postdoctoral position. Currently, her research focuses on the up and downstream processing of microalgae, harnessing innovative biological and technological approaches to improve efficiency, mitigate costs, and consequently leverage the application of microalgae on the market. Welcome. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Selena, for the great introduction. It's a pleasure being here, and thanks a lot for the invitation. I highly appreciate the chance of presenting at least a part of the research that we are conducting at the ETH Zurich Laboratory of Sustainable Food Processing, and our approach on to how we can support developing more sustainable food systems. Next slide. Thanks. So probably, as the majority of you all know, in 2000 we are facing some megatrends, and one of them is that in 2050 there are going to be 9.7 billion people living on this planet. And to meet the demands of a growing population, our food production will need to increase by around 70%. However, our current agri-food systems are already exceeding the planetary boundaries and are a major contributor to anthropogenic climate change. Hence, we need to find novel technology, novel approaches to sustainably transform our current agri-food systems. Next slide. Thanks. And here, novel raw materials, plant-based raw materials, or single-cell-based value chains, such as those of microalgae, arose as a promising alternative owing the sustainable notion of their connected value chains. Microalgae are a really interesting resource as they can be grown independent of arable land, so we could just go to cities and grow them in tanks or in the facades of houses, which also goes along quite well with our trend of urbanization or more and more people living in cities. Microalgae are nutritionally rich. They are high in protein content, up to 70% depending on the species that we use. And they have a biomass productivity that is 5 to 10 times higher than that of other plant crops. So they're quite an interesting resource. However, microalgae production is currently not more sustainable if we, for instance, compare it to soy or pea protein. Therefore, we are investigating approaches on how to sustainably enhance microalgae production. Next slide now. Perfect. So for instance, for microalgae, we distinguish the upstream and the downstream processing, and the upstream processing is associated with the cultivation. And here, together with the World Food Systems Center, we've been investigating a technology called pulsed electric field processing, where we will able to increase or significantly increase the biomass yields that we obtain from different microalgae. Here, we were working with Atrospira platensis, Chlorella vulgaris, and we were also able to significantly increase the biomass yields of yeast, so Saccharomyces cerevisiae, without using additional resources. Thereby, we can boost production and decrease the costs of microalgae production. And here we could also see that we could increase the content of the high-value component phycocyanin. And why is phycocyanin interesting? It's the only natural occurring blue colorant for the food market. Next slide again. Perfect, thanks. So an example of phycocyanin you can see here on the bottom left corner. So it's really nicely blue and a component that we can achieve quite high prices. However, if we talk about microalgae and if we want to use microalgae, we don't only want to extract certain components. One interesting thing is also to use the whole microalgae, where we could use them in, for instance, meat analog together with other protein components such as soy or also rice, or use different components, only the proteins, for creating foams. And here it is important to really use all, if we really want to be sustainable, to use all the components that we have in the microalgae, and not only lipids or proteins or colorants, but to really make use of the whole cell and all the valuable components of the microalgae. And yeah, as I said before, we can, for instance, use the whole microalgae to create meat analogs, which you can see here on the bottom right corner. And if you change to the next slide, we were, for instance, the first group who was able to show that we can use those microalgae, bright yellow microalgae, to produce meat analogues. And with that saying, so this is, yeah, some glimpse of what we're doing here at ETH, using the microalgae, using components of the microalgae, as you will also see later for the smoothie production, on how we could use them to and try to make our agri-food system more sustainable by doing that. With that, thanks a lot for your attention and looking forward for the next talk.
Thanks so much. Adding to that conversation is Kanaha Shoji. Kanaha is an environmental scientist at EMPA, a Swiss federal research institute. She is a Georgia Tech alumni where she earned her bachelor's in environmental engineering. She moved to Switzerland and received her master's from EPFL. Currently, her focus is on optimizing the supply chain of fruits and vegetables. Together with her team, she looks at the different segments of the post-harvest system and tries to find solutions to reduce food loss and waste.
Hello everyone, I hope you can hear me fine. Hello from Switzerland, and thank you so much for having me, and it's just wonderful to be back to Georgia Tech like this. So my topic is on food waste at home and how to reduce it. Here at EMPA Switzerland, we are also working on technology to do that. But before we diving into this talk, I want to ask you a few questions to make this topic more relevant to each one of you. So if you can go to the next slide, please. Here are some questions. And because we're making or having this smoothie session afterwards, let's think of the ingredients you need for this smoothie. So fresh veggies and fruits. Where do you get them? And once you have them, how do you store them? Do you manage to eat all that you have? Here, perhaps you can maybe reflect back on your behaviors. And do you have any tips, tricks on how to keep these ingredients fresh longer? Please keep this question in mind, and now let's think of this topic not just at your home, but as a part of the global world system, global food system. So if you can go to the next slide, please. Yeah, thank you. According to, there's a little bit of shift in the slide, but it's okay. According to FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization, one third of food produced for human consumption has been lost or wasted. And if you have a closer look on that, households usually represent the biggest part of this, especially for fresh fruits and vegetables. But why is that the case? Well, it's actually because of our lack of knowledge and awareness. We don't really know how much we waste. Do you remember the question I asked at the beginning? How did you manage to eat all that you have? Second, we don't really know how they were stored. For example, do you know the temperature and humidity in the fridge actually fluctuates quite a lot, even if you have the door always closed? And finally, we don't know how to store fruits and vegetables properly. So it's not too much to say that we are facing these global food system issues because of our, like I said, our lack of knowledge and awareness. Meanwhile, we at EMPA, we work on a technology called digital twin to monitor to simulate how these fresh produce change their quality over time. Next slide, please. So, like I said, the technology is called digital twins. Thank you. And that's because we use this sensor data as an input, so it links to the reality and runs in the simulation, which is physics-based model. And with that, we get complementary insights that we wouldn't see otherwise, and get actionable metrics such as remaining shelf life. In our research, our group came up with this idea. We saw the benefits the consumer could also get by having access to such technology. So that's how we came up with this idea to create an app where consumer can learn where to store their produce and and monitor their conditions. So in the rest of my talk, I want to introduce how it looks in actions. So if you can go to the next slide, please. This app is called My Fruit Twin. And here on the left corner, you have a QR code, so feel free to test it out. It's PWA, Progressive Web App. So basically, it's just a website. So you don't need to worry about downloading it. And feel free to test it out along with me. So here with this tiny video, you see the temperature and humidity input at the top, if you know the exact condition. But otherwise, use it as a way to kind of test your knowledge. And I decided to use strawberry for my smoothies. So I'm trying to see how long they will last under this condition that I put at the top. In this tab, now you see the shelf life, and then you can see how different products has different shelf life, so how long they can stay fresh, even if they store in the same condition. Here in the Fruit Twin tab, now with the pop-up at the bottom, it gives you a little bit of tips. And to get the answer for where to store, if you can go to the optimal condition tab, it gives you the range that these fruits or vegetables like to be under a temperature range and humidity range. If you can go to the next slide, please. Again, in the shelf life tab, and here it gives you some option on changing the initial conditions. So for instance, maybe you have a strawberry garden and you can get strawberry just right next to you. In that case, you have more fresh product, and that would affect how long you can actually keep. So you can change that and see how that will affect the remaining shelf life. And of course, you can still change the input at the top to see which product is more perishable than the other and more sensitive to, for instance, temperature more than humidity. So that's more or less what I want to share in our app we have. So to conclude my talk, next slide, please. We will give our answers to you. Of course, there is no one fit for all answers, but perhaps you want to have the most fresh one and you're not really planning to make smoothie right away. Perhaps you can buy them locally, or garden might be better next door. And you can, if it's strawberries, you can store them in the coldest part in your fridge. And with that, you plan very well and manage to eat all that you have. Amazing. And more tips, with all this information as well as more tips, you can check out our app, My Fruit Twin. And that being said, thank you so much for having me. You can go to the next slide, please. Here is our link to the website, and same as the app, which is the same link you can get from QR code. And my contact info is here if you need to. Thanks a lot, and really thank you for the organizers.
Thank you so much. And again, that link to My Fruit Twin is also in the chat, so please feel free to explore that. Please add your questions for our speakers to the chat in the Q&A, and in the meantime, we are going to introduce Concrete Jungle, who will be joining us today to show a sustainable smoothie recipe.
Hello and welcome to the Global Climate Action Symposium. We are here for changing the food system one smoothie at a time. Yeah! My name is Claire. I am a second-year master's student at the Rollins School of Public Health, and I'm here with Concrete Jungle. Hey! Concrete Jungle is a non-profit that aims to take underutilized fruit trees and land and give back to the local community. Concrete Jungle falls in between the spheres of food waste and food insecurity. So this is important because 43% of food waste happens within the home, and the average family of 4 will spend $1,500 on food that they don't eat. On a larger scale, about 1.4 billion pounds of food worldwide are wasted. So we are here to show you that smoothies can be a great way to minimize your own food waste, whether that be some soggy vegetables in your fridge or fruit that's been sitting on your counter for too long. You can put them together in a smoothie and minimize your own food waste. So we've got 2 main smoothie recipes for y'all today. We've got a Concrete Jungle pear smoothie and a general food waste reducing smoothie. So for the Concrete Jungle smoothie, our ingredient of focus is pears. So we've got 364 pear trees around Atlanta that we harvest. They're a great smoothie base just because they're a little bit harder than the pears that you would typically get at the grocery store, so it makes for a good, clean smoothie base. They have a nice fall taste. They kind of give that apple pie taste to the smoothie. So for this recipe, we want 2 pears with the core taken out and chopped up into small pieces. So the next ingredient that we have is peaches. And so Georgia is famous for peaches. We are at the end of the growing season for peaches right now, but I'm still getting them in my CSA, Community Supported Agriculture, which is just a way that you can buy from your local farms and it goes directly back into the farmers' pockets. And so for this recipe, we're taking 1 peach cut up into pieces and we're gonna remove the pit as well and just throw that in there. All right, so the next ingredient in the smoothie is spinach. Spinach is a great smoothie base because it gives it a little bit more nutrients with the greens, and also I know that I'm guilty of always having a bag of soggy spinach in the fridge, so it makes a great kind of smoothie component. It also makes it a little bit of a smoother texture. And so for this recipe, we're using about 1.5 cups of spinach. I usually just like to eyeball it and say about a handful or so, about that much. And we're gonna throw that in there. And so next we've got our type of dairy base. So for this recipe, I am using the Silk soy yogurt replacement. I typically try not to eat dairy, so this is my yogurt of choice. But if you're someone who likes dairy, you can feel free to use regular yogurt, you can use Greek yogurt, whatever works for you. For this recipe, we're using about 1/2 cup. I'm gonna put in half there. And if you are the type of person who likes your smoothies a little bit thicker, you can go ahead and add a little bit more. If you like it a little bit thinner, just hold back. It kind of, depends on what you are interested in. And so the next ingredient we have is honey. This is from Bebop Honey. Our friend Nehemiah collects the honey from hives all around Atlanta, a couple of which are on our farm in Southwest Atlanta. And if you're someone who, if you're vegan or you're not interested in putting honey in your smoothie, you can use any type of sweetener. You can use white sugar, you could use brown sugar, or even sugar replacement like stevia or something like that. And so for this recipe, we're just gonna put in about 2 tablespoons. If you like your smoothies a little less sweet, put a little less in. If you like them a little more sweet, put a little more in.
All the honey.
All right, and then we are going to throw in just a little bit of cinnamon. It adds to the kind of fall spice kind of attitude that we have with the pears. So I just like to throw in just about a little, about that much. I would say if you had to measure it, about 1/4 teaspoon. I kind of just eyeball it, about a sprinkle. It adds that kind of apple pie flavor that we've got going on. And the last main ingredient we have for our smoothie is algae powder.
Algae?
So as talked about earlier in the symposium, algae is a great sustainable protein source. And so this also is packed full of vitamins. It's got a ton of vitamin A, it's got a ton of vitamin K and B12, and it gives the smoothie a really great color. And so I will say with this that less is more. So definitely if it's your first time working with algae powder, start out on the kind of lesser side. I'm gonna be using about 1/2 teaspoon. All right, so now you're almost ready to blend. The last thing is if you're a type of person who likes your smoothies a little bit thinner, you're gonna use a thinning agent. So if you don't wanna add any flavor or any type of creaminess, just go ahead and throw a little bit of water in here. I am going to be using cashew milk because this is my favorite non-dairy milk of choice. But you can use, if you are a dairy drinker, you can go ahead and use regular milk, or if you are looking for a more sustainable option, you can use cashew milk, oat milk, macadamia nut milk, whatever milk suits your fancy. And I'm just going to use about 1/2 cup of this. And then we're gonna throw in some ice. And you know what time it is? time to blend. All right, now that you got your workout in, let's try our smoothie. Got some fruit for the fruits.
Okay.
And now for the big reveal.
Cheers.
That's really good.
And that is your Concrete Jungle pear smoothie. Welcome back. It's me and the fruits. How was the smoothie, fruits?
Finished mine.
Those are some empty glasses if I've seen so myself. And so now we are moving on to the general food waste reducing smoothie. And so this is for people who might not live in Georgia or have access to that same local produce that we do. And so these are some fruits that are generally most often forgotten about. And so I've loaded up my blender with the same ingredients from the last smoothie that are kind of our staples. We've got the same dairy-free yogurt. If you like the full dairy yogurt, go ahead and use that. And then I've put my spinach, my algae powder, and some of my thinner in there as well. And so we've got kind of 3 new ingredients to add to this smoothie. And so we're gonna start off with bananas. And I don't know about you, but I very often leave bananas on my counter for way too long and then they get too brown and I just can't eat them. But actually, when the bananas are getting more brown, they're actually getting sweeter. And so that makes a really kind of great, kind of creamy, sweet, almost like ice creamy component to the smoothie. So for this recipe, we're going to chop up 2 bananas just into small slices and you're gonna throw that in your blender. No banana left behind. And then we've got our mixed berries, and so I chose mixed berries here just because I feel like berries are very often left in the fridge for too long and then they kind of get past their peak ripeness and they're kind of squishy, but they're not bad. And so a smoothie is a really good place to put these in there. And so I have today strawberries and blueberries, what I had in my fridge that was starting to go bad, but you can use any type of berry that you want. You can use raspberries, blackberries, even cherries if you want. They all pair really nicely with bananas and spinach. And so you're gonna use about 1.5 to 2 cups of these. Last but not least, we have to throw in our ice. And this is, if you're the type of person who has also bags of frozen fruit in their freezer, you can eliminate the ice and just put in frozen berries instead. And you are still using the already existing fruit in your fridge and freezer. Do you know what time it is?
I do know this time. Here we go. Let's do it. Lifting time.
It's time to blend. Sometimes it just needs a good poke. There we go. That's what I'm talking about. Look at it go now. Alrighty. Look at that nice color from the algae powder. Let's pass it off to our fruits.
Thank you. That's delicious. I taste it.
Banana eating banana. So there you have it, guys. Those are some ways that you can transform your already existing fruit into ways to eliminate food waste. Thank you so much to the Global Climate Action Symposium for having us, and I hope that the next time you have a brown banana, you think, what would Claire do? And then you put it in a smoothie and enjoy the rest of the symposium.
Thanks for that incredible tutorial. Before we head off to make our own smoothies, I'd like to ask Iris and Kanaha a few questions from our audience. My first question is for you, Iris. What do you think needs to be done so that consumers accept algae as a protein source?
So thank you so much for this really interesting and super relevant question. We've also been dealing with that before, and it's really interesting. Just today we announced a new project that we will be launching in Singapore, where we will exactly be dealing with those questions. So the 2 points that we thought are most important, or saw that they are most important, are one's the costs of microalgae-based products. Second, also their taste, texture, that don't seem very appealing to consumers yet. So what we want to do is to tackle, this cost perspective, trying to decrease costs of microalgae production to make products more affordable for consumers. And the other aspect is to really do very broad consumer studies to try to understand what do consumers actually expect from microalgae-based products. So, how should they look like? How should they taste like? How should the texture be? Do they want to have powder? Do they want to have meat analogs? Or do they want to have something like, a smoothie? So to get a real good understanding of what consumers need or want, and then try to incorporate it into our research to produce products that are low in costs and are also appealing to consumers.
Thanks, Iris. My next question is for you, Kanaha. Do you use the app yourself that you mentioned earlier? Has it changed your food waste at home? And what did you find most surprising when you started using it?
Yeah, so thanks for the question. That's a really good point. I do use myself. It's not like I use for everything, but it's definitely I use it, and has it changed my waste? Well, yes, because I get to know. Main thing I realized was they were quite perishable. So then I started to buy things more. Like once I know when to use them, that actually quite helps a lot. That I can always use them fresh. And of course, making smoothies is also a good option as well. I also myself start to make smoothies these days, so it's very good. And what was the surprising thing, most surprising part? I actually have a fridge that has the lowest temperature at the top, but I always thought that the lowest part would be more at the bottom. And I tend to keep, for instance, the strawberry I mentioned, they were quite sensitive to temperature and they like the lower temperature. I just thought I would just put in the lowest because they were the coolest, but it wasn't the case. So it was kind of nice that I get to kind of test it on my own fridge to see which temperature, how the condition of the fridge I use, and can reflect back with the app I created to know what's the condition of them and how I also can properly store them.
And then the next question is for you, Iris. And the question is, what kind of microalgae do you eat yourself, and what would you recommend?
There's only 7 different kinds of microalgae that are allowed to be used as food. The main microalgae that we know is the Chlorella vulgaris, that I was also talking before, which is like before as greenish somehow, and you can get it as a powder. Then there's the spirulina, which is the bright blue one that a lot of people use. I've tried both and tried to incorporate them into my diet, mainly also as powder. And there's another microalgae species that is currently under approval process, but here in research sometimes you have access to like these kind of microalgae. It's called golden chlorella, and this one it's also a type of chlorella, but it's bright yellow and kind of golden. So it's really nice if you want to incorporate it into food, for instance, because it doesn't turn brownish or grayish upon processing. So I've tried those 3, and I think so for the chlorella and the atrospire or spirulina, they're both are quite healthy. So like they said before in the video with the vitamin B12, high in protein content, that is also the protein composition is according to the recommendations of the WHO. So from my perspective, I can support eating both or incorporating them into the diet.
Great. Well, thank you both for being here today. I guess to sum up, what are 1 to 2 key takeaways that you'd like to leave people with today? What are 1 to 2 of the most important things? Both Iris and Kanaha.
Yeah, who should start?
You can go ahead.
You start.
Yeah, 2 key takeaways. It's a really good question. I mean, it's a very diverse topic, but that microalgae are super promising and that they're a potential more sustainable resource of the future, but that we need to do more research to make them really sustainable. But that we are quite far in the process and we should really support this development of plant-based meat alternatives, but that microalgae are also not the only solution, right? So we can't all just eat microalgae, but yeah, we should also look at sustainably transforming our agri-food system, our technologies that we currently have, and other single-cell based technologies such as yeast or bacteria.
And I guess I would say let's be responsible consumers. Like I remember someone mentioning also in the symposium today, we can be a part of the solution. Now we are also part of the issues because we are the one causing food waste as well. But yes, we can be a part of the solution. So let's think of what we do, reflect back on what we know, and try to do our best.
Well, thank you both so much. And thank you all for this amazing first day of the Global Climate Action Symposium. I want to remind everybody before we close out and make our own sustainable smoothies to remember to join us tomorrow morning starting at 9 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time for robust discussions on climate and health. They'll range from COVID-19 to topics of air quality, heat islands, and equity. You can join the symposium tomorrow with the same link that you used today. So thank you all for your time, and I look forward to seeing you all tomorrow.